The exhaustion you feel isn't a lack of energy. It's energy being consumed to keep you divided against yourself. Every time one part of you wants to move forward and another part wants to protect you, the system goes to war, and internal wars are expensive. Quantum entanglement revealed something that ancient traditions already taught. Coherence can exist without control. Two particles separated by impossible distances remain connected without supervision, without effort, and without constant vigilance. Your subconscious was trained under the opposite regime: hold everything together or everything falls apart. That regime is a lie, and you're paying for it in vitality every single day. The energy you're searching for in supplements, techniques, and external motivation is already inside you. It's just being held hostage, keeping a division running that never needed to exist in the first place.
There's something that physics discovered in the 20th century that should have changed everything. Two particles are separated. One stays here, the other is taken to the other side of the universe. No wire connects the two, no signal travels between them, nothing visible maintains any link. And yet, when one changes, the other responds, instantly, as if the distance simply didn't exist. Quantum entanglement reveals something disturbing about the structure of reality. Systems can remain perfectly correlated without continuous supervision, without active control, without constant effort to keep the connection working. Coherence can exist without permanent vigilance. Now think about how you were taught to live. From childhood, the message was clear. If you don't hold on, everything falls apart. Emotions need to be contained, or they explode. Thoughts need to be corrected, or they destroy you. Impulses need to be suppressed, or you lose control. Relationships demand constant maintenance, or they end. You yourself need to be watched, by yourself, all the time. This is the regime that most people operate under. And this regime has a cost that nobody mentions. Every thought you monitor consumes energy. Every emotion you contain requires effort. Every part of you that needs to be watched so it doesn't step out of line represents continuous expenditure. Invisible, silent, relentless. You wake up tired without having done anything. You feel exhausted in the middle of the day for no apparent reason. You go to bed feeling like something drained you from the inside, but you can't identify what. This is the cost of maintaining internal vigilance 24 hours a day. The Kybalion, a hermetic text preserved for centuries, transmits something that contemporary physics is only now beginning to approach. The all is mind, the universe is mental. The unity already exists. Separation is an operational illusion. At the deepest level, everything is already connected, without effort, without maintenance, and without supervision. Quantum entanglement is the contemporary translation of this ancient truth. The subconscious learns through repeated exposure to patterns. That's how fears get installed. You don't decide to be afraid, you absorb it. That's how beliefs form. Nobody convinces you, you internalize them. That's how the regime of vigilance crystallized in you, through immersion, not through conscious choice. The same mechanism works in reverse. When you deeply contemplate entanglement, not as internet curiosity, but as real meditation on what it reveals, the subconscious begins to absorb another pattern. Coherence without control. Connection without supervision. Unity without effort. When this pattern takes hold, something begins to change inside. The internal micromanagement starts to diminish. The tension of keeping everything under control loses its intensity. The need to watch every corner of yourself starts to relax. The energy that was being consumed by vigilance starts to become available. Energy that was always there, but was occupied. Occupied with monitoring, occupied with containing, occupied with preventing parts of you from becoming misaligned. When the subconscious learns that coherence exists without constant control, this expenditure simply stops. The chronic exhaustion begins to dissolve. availability appears. The Kybalion teaches that the universe operates by mental laws, and that understanding these laws allows you to align with them instead of fighting against them. Quantum entanglement demonstrates one of these laws in action. Coherence emerges when the system stops resisting itself. This is the first movement. Entanglement teaches, the subconscious absorbs, and the internal regime begins to change. The unity already exists. You just need to stop spending energy pretending it doesn't. You want to move forward, and at the same time, you want to protect yourself. You want to take risks, but you want guarantees. You want to expose yourself, but you want armor. You want to change, but you want to keep who you were. You want to love, but you want control over the outcome. These oppositions happen inside you all the time, simultaneously, continuously, and each one of them charges a price you never see on the bill. The greatest consumption of human energy comes from internal war. Every time one part of you wants something and another part resists, you enter into conflict with yourself. And conflicts require energy to sustain themselves, energy to keep two opposing forces in permanent tension, energy to prevent one from destroying the other, or both from destroying you. This expenditure is invisible, constant, immense. You wake up exhausted without having done anything significant the day before. You spend the day dragging a weight you can't name. You arrive at night completely drained without understanding the source of the exhaustion. You spent the entire day and all the previous days sustaining internal oppositions that never stop consuming fuel. A Course in Miracles, a spiritual text scribed by Helen Schucman in the 1970s, describes this mechanism with precision that should make you stop and pay attention. The mind split, out of fear. Fear created the original separation, and once divided, the mind began to harbor parts that constantly oppose each other. A part that desires, and another that judges the desire as wrong. A part that dreams, and another that ridicules the dream as naive. A part that wants connection, and another that closes off to avoid the pain of loss. This division has an operational cost. Every separated fragment requires energy to be kept in its place. Every active opposition requires energy so it doesn't explode into collapse. The divided mind functions like a consumption machine, running 24 hours a day, burning fuel just to keep the structure of division functioning. The energy you feel is missing is being used, right now, at this very moment, to sustain parts of you that are at war with each other. This is what the traditions call hidden energy, energy that's been sequestered, diverted, channeled to keep the internal conflict active. You want something and you punish yourself for wanting it. That internal punishment consumes real energy. You think one way and feel another. Keeping these two realities separate without exploding consumes real energy. You deeply desire something and at the same time convince yourself you don't deserve it. That constant internal negotiation consumes real energy. All of this happens below the surface of consciousness. You don't see the mechanism, you only feel the result, the inexplicable exhaustion, the feeling of always running after something you never catch, the fatigue that no amount of rest resolves. Quantum entanglement reveals something that changes this equation. Two separated particles. Each one has its properties, distinct, different, and yet perfectly correlated, connected without fusion, aligned without one needing to dominate or cancel the other for coherence to exist. Distinct parts can remain connected without cancelling each other out. When the subconscious absorbs this logic, through repeated exposure, through deep contemplation, something begins to change. Internal opposition stops seeming like the only possible form of organization. The silent war begins to lose its meaning, and the regime of domination, where one part tries to control or suppress the others, begins to give way to coordination. Coordination. Distinct parts operating together, aligned by a larger pattern, without anyone needing to subjugate the rest. Coordination costs infinitely less energy than domination. A Course in Miracles teaches that healing undoes the separation that created the break in the first place. When the mind stops dividing against itself, the conflict ceases for lack of fuel. And when the conflict ceases, the energy that sustained it is immediately released. Energy that was always yours, but was occupied. Occupied with keeping you divided. Occupied with sustaining tensions you didn't even know existed. Occupied with feeding an internal war that never had and never will have a winner. Entanglement reveals that coherence exists without control. Those parts can remain distinct and yet perfectly aligned. That connection depends on recognition of the pattern that already exists. When the subconscious internalizes this, it stops investing in opposition. And when it stops investing, the energy returns.
There is a peculiar cruelty in the way most people relate to their own contradictions. The part that desires is treated as irresponsible. The part that fears is treated as weak. The part that dreams is treated as naive. And the part that judges all the others operates as if it were the only adult in the room. This internal hierarchy was never chosen. It was inherited, absorbed through years of watching how others handled their own fragmentation. The tragedy is not that these parts exist. The tragedy is the war between them and the silent assumption that one must win for the system to function. No one asks the obvious question, what if the war itself is the dysfunction? What if the exhaustion is not a symptom of having too many parts, but of forcing them into a battle none of them can ever win?
Your subconscious is a prediction system. Every instant, it tries to anticipate what comes next, calculating risks, evaluating patterns, comparing what's happening now with what has happened before. And from these comparisons, it decides something crucial. Are you safe or are you in danger? This decision happens in the deep layers of the mind, below any thought you could observe. Whenever the subconscious detects internal incoherence, parts of you wanting opposite things, feeling contradictory things, operating in different directions, it interprets this as instability. And instability, for the survival system, means danger. What happens when the system detects danger? It activates vigilance, constant vigilance, continuous monitoring, attention divided among multiple internal fronts. The subconscious goes into alert mode, not because of an external threat, but because your own parts are in conflict. And vigilance consumes energy, a lot of energy. That anxiety that seems to have no cause, cost of monitoring, that mental tiredness that doesn't improve with rest, cost of monitoring, that scattered feeling that prevents you from focusing on anything for more than a few minutes. Cost of monitoring, real energy expenditures from an alarm system that's on all the time. You live in a state of internal emergency, and you pay the price for it in exhaustion, confusion, and the constant feeling of running without getting anywhere. The Kybalion transmits a principle that illuminates exactly this mechanism. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. Everything in the universe is vibration. Thoughts vibrate, emotions vibrate, internal states vibrate. And when vibrations are in harmony, the system flows with minimal friction. When vibrations are in dissonance, when internal parts operate at conflicting frequencies, friction multiplies. Constant friction means constant expenditure. Every part of you that vibrates in opposition to another part generates internal friction, and this friction translates into muscle tension you don't even notice, into shallow breathing that never completes, into thoughts that spin in circles without ever finding resolution. The body pays, the mind pays. Available energy decreases, burned to keep the dissonance functioning. Quantum entanglement reveals another possibility. Two entangled particles remain correlated without needing to check on each other constantly. Coherence simply exists because it's the nature of the system. Non-local coherence exists without point-to-point supervision. When the subconscious absorbs this pattern, through repeated exposure, through deep contemplation, something fundamental begins to change. It stops feeling like it needs to check every internal part all the time to ensure the system won't collapse. Vigilance decreases. The system itself learned that coherence can exist without constant monitoring, that the parts can remain aligned without a control center needing to verify each one at every instant. The consequences are enormous. Less vigilance means less baseline energy expenditure. The alarm that was on 24 hours a day begins to turn off. The body leaves the state of chronic readiness. The mind stops dividing attention among internal fronts that seem to require constant supervision. Less vigilance means systemic trust. It's the difference between a manager who needs to supervise every employee every minute and a system where the parts operate aligned by a common principle without constant external control. Entanglement demonstrates that the second model exists, that it works, and when the subconscious recognizes this model as valid, it abandons the first. The Kybalion teaches that harmony is the alignment of distinct vibrations in a coherent pattern. The internal parts can be different. They need to be in correspondence. As above, so below, as below, so above. The principle that operates in the cosmos operates in you. Fragmentation generates vigilance because the system doesn't trust itself. Non-local coherence turns off the alarm because the system recognizes it can trust. The energy that fear consumed, fear of falling apart, fear of losing control, fear that the internal parts will collapse, that energy is released the moment trust takes hold. Energy that was trapped in the alarm system. When the alarm turns off, it becomes available. The body doesn't operate independently. It responds. Every internal state of the mind translates into a corresponding state in the organism. What happens in the deep layers of the subconscious manifests in the flesh, in the muscles, in the breathing, and in the posture. This mirroring is happening right now as you listen to this. The fragmented mind produces a body in a state of readiness. When your internal parts are in conflict, when one part wants to advance and another wants to retreat, when one part desires and another condemns the desire, the body interprets this silent war as a threat, and in the face of a threat, it prepares to defend. You know this preparation. You just never realized it was active all the time. Micro-tension in the muscles of the shoulders, the neck, and the jaw. You didn't decide to tense those muscles. They tensed on their own, responding to the internal regime of conflict. Shallow breathing that never completes. You didn't decide to breathe halfway. The body's restricted breathing automatically. Organisms on alert don't breathe deeply. Breathing deeply is something you do when you feel safe. Unstable attention that jumps from one point to another without being able to settle. You didn't choose to be scattered. The nervous system divides attention across multiple fronts. That's what you do when there's danger in several directions. All of this happens below consciousness. You don't control it. You only feel the result. Tiredness that doesn't improve with sleep, tension that doesn't go away with massage, and restlessness that doesn't subside with distraction. The body is in containment mode, and containment mode consumes energy, even when you're still, even when nothing external is demanding a response. A Course in Miracles presents a principle that illuminates this mechanism. The body is neutral. It has no agenda of its own. It doesn't decide on its own to be tense or relaxed, exhausted or vibrant. It serves the purpose the mind assigns. If the mind is at war with itself, the body configures itself for war. If the mind is at peace, the body reflects that peace in every cell, every muscle, and every system. The body is a mirror of the internal regime. When the subconscious absorbs the logic of entanglement, coherence without control, connection without vigilance, it stops operating in a regime of fragmentation. The internal parts stop seeming like threats to each other. The silent war loses intensity. And the body notices, not because you told it to relax, not because you did a conscious breathing exercise. The regime that governed the body changed. The signal arriving now is different. There's no internal conflict demanding continuous defense. The organism leaves containment mode. The muscles that were chronically tense begin to release, not because you commanded them to, but because there's no longer any reason to hold on. The breathing that was restricted begins to complete, not because you remembered to breathe deeply, but because the nervous system understood it's safe to expand. The attention that was fragmented across multiple points of vigilance begins to unify, not because you forced yourself to focus, but because there are no longer internal fronts demanding simultaneous monitoring. The body enters efficiency mode. The subjective sensation is that you've gained energy. You wake up more energized. You get through the day without that inexplicable weight. You arrive at night still with reserves. It seems like something was added. Nothing was added. What happened was subtraction of waste, subtraction of unnecessary expenditure, subtraction of the cost of keeping the body in a state of readiness for a war that only existed inside your own mind. The power that appears is energy that was always there, but was being burned to keep you in a state of defense against yourself. Quantum entanglement operates by changing the mental regime that governs the body. And when the regime changes, the body responds, because that's what bodies do. They respond to the regime. The Kybalion teaches that there is correspondence between all planes, as above, so below, as within, so without. What happens at the mental level is reflected at the physical level. What happens in the invisible layers of the mind manifests in the visible layers of the organism. A Course in Miracles teaches that healing of the body begins in the mind, because the body only manifests what the mind decides. Healing the body without healing the mind is treating the symptom while ignoring the cause. When the mind enters coherence, the body reflects that coherence. When the internal regime shifts from fragmentation to alignment, the body stops wasting, and what seemed like a lack of energy reveals itself as misdirected energy, now available, now accessible, and now yours. Power is the consequence of internal organization. The body simply reflects what has already happened in the mind. The fragmented mind has a compulsion. It needs to explain everything, close everything, conclude everything. Any information that comes in needs to be processed, categorized, and resolved. Any tension between ideas needs to be eliminated. Any paradox needs to be undone. This compulsion seems productive. It seems like intelligence in action. It seems like you're being rational, organized, and logical. What it really is, an energy drain that never stops. Paradoxes threaten control. When you encounter something that seems true on one side and true on the opposite side at the same time, the fragmented mind enters a state of emergency. It needs to resolve. It needs to choose a side. It needs to fabricate an explanation that eliminates the tension. And fabricating explanations costs energy. Every rationalization you create to make sense of things needs to be maintained. Every story you tell yourself about why things are the way they are requires continuous effort to sustain. Every time reality contradicts your explanation, you spend more energy adjusting, patching, and defending. Self-deception is expensive. Denial is expensive. Rationalization is expensive. You're paying in energy, in vitality, and in mental availability to keep running a system of explanations that tries to eliminate paradoxes that cannot be eliminated. The Kybalion transmits a principle that dissolves this mechanism at the root. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites. The opposites are identical in nature, differing only in degree. The opposites are the same thing. Heat and cold seem contrary. They're the same thing, temperature, in different degrees. Light and darkness seem opposite. They're the same thing, luminosity, in different degrees. Love and hate seem like incompatible extremes. They're the same thing, emotional intensity, in different degrees. When you understand this principle, paradoxes stop being problems to solve. They become natural expressions of a reality that operates by polarity. The tension between opposites stops being a threat. It becomes structure. Quantum entanglement forces the mind to sustain something it would normally reject. Two particles separated by immense distances respond to each other instantly. The mind wants to explain this through linear causality, one thing causing the other through some mechanism. The explanation doesn't exist. The phenomenon simply happens. The mind is forced to sustain what it cannot resolve. And here's what happens when you contemplate entanglement deeply, repeatedly, as meditation. The subconscious begins to learn something new. It learns that there are realities that function without linear causal explanation. That connection can exist without a visible mechanism of linkage. That coherence can exist without you understanding how. It learns that not understanding everything isn't an immediate threat. This learning changes the internal regime. The urgency to close the meaning diminishes. The compulsion to explain everything loses force. The need to fabricate rationalizations, to eliminate internal tensions, begins to relax. And the energy cost of those mental operations simply drops. Think about how much energy you spend trying to understand why someone did what they did, trying to explain why you feel what you feel, trying to rationalize why things happened the way they happened, trying to close stories that may never have closure. Each one of those attempts is an expenditure. When the mind learns to sustain paradoxes, to coexist with tensions that don't need to be resolved, that expenditure drops drastically. You stop fabricating hasty explanations that need to be defended later. You stop spending energy maintaining rationalizations that reality contradicts all the time. You stop investing in self-deception to protect premature conclusions. The energy that was occupied in this work of mental maintenance becomes available. The Kybalion teaches that opposite poles are reconcilable because they're the same thing in different degrees. Entanglement demonstrates that apparently impossible realities coexist without the need for linear explanation. Together, these principles train the mind to sustain tension without needing to eliminate it, and sustaining is more efficient than resolving. Resolving requires fabricating an explanation, defending it, maintaining it, and adjusting it when reality contradicts it. Sustaining requires only accepting that the paradox exists and continuing to function. The energy formerly spent on defensive explanation becomes free to act, to create, to move, to live. Mystery stops being a problem. It becomes simply what it is, and you stop paying the cost of pretending you understand what doesn't need to be understood.
The compulsion to understand is rarely about understanding. It is about safety. The mind that cannot tolerate mystery operates under a specific terror that what remains unexplained might destroy it. And so it builds frameworks, narratives, causal chains, anything to fill the void where uncertainty lives. But every structure built to eliminate mystery becomes a structure that must be defended, and defense is expensive. The mind that learns to coexist with what it cannot resolve discovers something counterintuitive. Mystery is not a threat. It is simply the texture of reality. Formerly spent constructing explanations becomes available the moment the construction stops. Not because the questions were answered, but because the need to answer them was recognized as the actual problem.
The subconscious isn't one thing. It's composed of multiple functional parts. A part that desires, a part that protects, a part that judges, a part that dreams, a part that fears, a part that advances, a part that retreats. These parts don't operate in natural harmony. They compete, they fight for space, they try to take control. And when one part tries to dominate the others, what happens? Resistance. The part that wants to advance pushes, the part that wants to protect pushes back. The part that desires pressures, the part that judges pressures against it. Every attempt at internal domination generates an opposing force, and that opposing force consumes energy. You don't notice the resistance happening. It operates below the surface, invisible and silent. What you notice is the result, the feeling of being stuck, the exhaustion that has no explanation, and the immense effort it takes to do things that should be simple. The drainage is continuous, and you don't know where it comes from because you can't see the war happening inside you. A Course in Miracles presents a principle that goes straight to the center of this mechanism. Healing is the release from fear. Fear was what created the original division. The mind fragmented because it was afraid of losing, afraid of being hurt, afraid of not surviving. And once fragmented, each part began to operate with its own agenda of protection. The division created the need for control. If the parts are separate and potentially in conflict, someone needs to control. Some part needs to take command and keep the others in line. Control generates resistance. Resistance generates expenditure. And the cycle perpetuates itself, consuming energy that should be available for living. The release from fear undoes the division. When fear diminishes, the need for control diminishes. When the need for control diminishes, resistance diminishes. When resistance diminishes, energy stops being consumed in internal battles. Quantum entanglement offers a model that the subconscious can absorb. Two entangled particles remain distinct. Each one keeps its properties. They don't fuse into one thing, and yet they're perfectly correlated, aligned by a pattern of coherence that exists without one needing to dominate the other. Integration without fusion, alignment without control, coherence without domination. This model can be internalized. When the subconscious is repeatedly exposed to this pattern, through deep contemplation of entanglement, through meditation focused on this principle, it begins to recognize another possibility of internal organization. The parts can remain distinct, they can keep their functions, and yet operate in alignment, coordinated by a higher pattern of coherence that eliminates the need for a regime of domination. When integration replaces domination, something fundamental changes. The system stops spending energy on containment. The parts stop fighting each other. The internal resistance, that invisible force that was consuming resources all the time, simply ceases. And the energy that was occupied sustaining the division becomes available. The Kybalion teaches that harmony among different parts creates a flow that amplifies power. A Course in Miracles teaches that peace is the natural state of the mind when fear is removed. Quantum entanglement demonstrates that coherence among distinct parts exists without the need for central control. Three traditions, one same principle, applied internally. Mastering quantum entanglement reorganizes the subconscious. It teaches the mind to operate through coherence instead of control. When this logic replaces the fragmented regime, the energy expenditure on vigilance and conflict drops dramatically. The energy that seemed hidden reveals itself as available, not because something was added, because the cost of keeping the system divided was eliminated. You don't need to create new energy, you need to stop wasting what you already have. And the path to that passes through a specific point. The mind needs to experience coherence directly. It needs to leave the regime of fragmented thinking and enter a state where integration happens, where the parts stop competing and begin to operate as an aligned system. This state has a name: meditation. All real change begins when the mind experiences, even for moments, what it means to operate in coherence. We've developed a set of audio tools designed to facilitate this experience. Specific frequencies that help the nervous system leave the mode of fragmentation and enter a pattern of integration. sounds calibrated to induce the kind of coherence that entanglement represents, connection without effort and alignment without control. To access these tools and start experiencing this state directly, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me,"